Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of Teacher Talk with Doc Rocker. As always, I'm your host, Russ Downey, and with me today, as always, is Danton of Doc Rocker Music,
Yo.
and our guest today, Adam Price, performer, musician, and teacher, is going to be talking with us today about a whole host of topics, including performing, touring, gigging, and teaching. So we've got a lot to talk about today, and I figured we would get started by introducing Adam. So, Adam, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody, that'd be awesome. Go for it.
Yeah, sure. I'm a musician. I'm a woodwind player primarily. My main instrument was clarinet, and then I obviously picked up all the other ones. I graduated from NYU years ago, and I've been freelancing and gigging since then, pretty much full time.
Gotcha.
Awesome. That's great. And you've been doing some private teaching on the side of that all as well, right?
Yep, yep. Private teaching occasionally, and then I do some music camps occasionally as well.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And that's actually a nice, interesting little way we can kind of start. That's how Adam and I met. Adam was
Same.
Oh,
the in
yeah.
the first echelon of guest music teachers. Once there was a big overhaul there was a local music camp in my hometown called Furwood Music Camp. And that's grounds for a whole separate episode. Honestly, we could talk about like summer camps and things like that. Furwood was a really, really magical place for me as a student to kind of go up through the ranks and learn a lot of different things. And I would say like right around like my junior, senior year, they got a new director in charge, and he decided to completely overhaul the education aspect of it. And that was right around the time that Adam and a number of his colleagues were still students at university. And it's like, we're going to hire teachers that either already have a degree or are actively working towards one. We're going to really try to like up the overall standard of what we're doing here. And that was right when I, as a high school kid, was trying to like get into music school. So it was like, oh my God, all these people that I want to be are coming to Furwood this year. This is amazing. And actually, that was our first experience working together. Adam was one of my teachers. You know, he coached me on flute and saxophone and a number of things. And we had a nice little crazy jazzy flute trio that we kind of did. We did like an arrangement of some stuff. You know, we had all kinds of fun. That was it was one of the best weeks of my life. And it was really an honor and a pleasure and a privilege to work with Adam and several other teachers that were there for that first kind of run of that whole generation of teachers. And Russ, that's where you said you met Adam as well, because you were a Furwood teacher at one point as well, right?
Yeah, it was actually, I think it might have been like the summer of 2013. So it was a little while ago. But yeah,
Yeah.
I got a chance to meet Adam, and it was awesome working with you. It was always a fun time because like it was just awesome to see you play. The kids always responded fantastically to you, which was always fun to watch. But yeah, that's how I met him. So, it's different circumstances, but the effect remains the same.
Yeah. So we're definitely beyond happy to have Adam here as a guest today. So
I'm honored to be here.
cool. That's great.
Well, I figured, since primarily, as you said, you're a performer, I figured we kind of start with that because myself personally, I'm not much of a performer beyond ensembles I was a part of in college or in high school or some that I teach and work alongside with. Danton, I know obviously you have more performing experience in the recent history.
Yeah.
But Adam, you said primarily this is how you earn a living, and given the current circumstances, of course. But I guess what we really wanted to find out is like, what's it like being a performing musician for a living? Can you kind of give us some insight into the pace of that side of the music business?
Uh, yeah, it's I guess the biggest thing for me, the hardest thing for me is lack of job security.
Okay.
You're not on salary anywhere. You don't know when your next gig is going to come. You try and hustle the best you can, but there's no guarantee that the same venues or the same people that hired you last time are going to hire you again. So
No, I could definitely understand that being an issue because it basically is like not necessarily hoping something falls into your lap, but that lack of like routine of something consistently coming in could
There's a
definitely
little
be
bit of a
stressful.
luck factor, I would say, from my limited experience. And this is barring anything COVID, right? This is like before COVID even started. It's difficult to guarantee you have that job security as a performer. And kind of if you get those chances where you do, It is a little bit of luck, Of course, a lot of the hard work factor pays off if you're a consistently good performer and you have an extensive repertoire and things like that. Those definitely help, but there is a little bit of that luck factor of like, oh, now I have this one thing that I can do every month, and that's great. Now I can kind of bank on getting that regularly and then seeing how many more ways I can supplement. So, what are some of the different venues through which you do perform, Adam?
Well, the main one recently, and again, since COVID hit, has changed the entire industry. But for the past couple years, I've been doing a lot of cruise ship work,
Okay.
which is, there's pros and cons to that.
What are
But
some of the cons? I'm curious because it sounds like a dream job. You get on this nice luxury thing, and you get to entertain every day for however many hours.
yeah, well, I don't want to go into all the cons, but yeah, it's not. It's I'm grateful for the work, and I love playing. It's not usually it's not very musically satisfying for me.
Hmm.
Okay.
You can only play Dancing Queen so many times before you get sick of it.
Okay.
No,
There's that.
actually, no, I understand completely. That's actually why I kind of titled the episode the way I did, because like I would imagine if you're consistently playing like a consistent gig in the same place, which runs that risk of kind of burning out on what's going on there, that you can only play the same songs that people want to hear so many times before it becomes
Like a bit of a burden.
yeah, more of a burden than an enjoyable type of thing. It's almost like you'd have to fight that taking the fun out of it.
I always think of the Bart Simpson meme of him like at the whiteboard for detention, and he's writing out the bass line to Pachelbel's Canon in D, and it's stretching across the entire and the boom 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 boom. So I can imagine there's a little bit of those feelings when you're in that kind of performance setting. Typically, how long does like a cruise ship gig stretch under normal conditions? How long are you on the boat before you touch back to land?
Yeah, there's a lot of different music jobs within the cruise scene.
Okay.
Um, and so it depends on your agent, the type of band you're in, the country you're from. So there's all sorts of things that change that. But for me, it's been usually about 4 months to 6 months at the
Wow,
longest.
it's a long time to be away.
Yeah, it's a long time to be away.
Gotcha. I mean, barring the fact that obviously you're gone for a while and it is the same situation, what are some of the pluses? I mean, I'm hoping there's some pluses of it beyond the whole stable gig type of thing.
No, I mean it's great. I get wanderlust very easily, so it's good for me in that sense. And you get like I've gotten to see places that I would never be able to afford to see in my lifetime. So that is really special, and I'm definitely grateful that I've gotten those opportunities. And you get to meet a lot of cool, interesting people. A lot of the crew on board is most of the crew is not from the United States.
Okay.
So it's really nice to get those cultural interactions that you wouldn't normally get with a regular job here. So that's really cool as well.
No, that's actually a really good point too, because I think a big part of what without getting on the soapbox about it, one of the things music always does really well is like that blending of cultures, given that we have tons of music that kind of mixes multiple cultural ideas and concepts together. And it's kind of cool to hear that like you have that all in one small environment, because despite the size of the ship, I would imagine that it's like being in the same environment and seeing the same people over and over again for 4 months at a time. So you really get to kind of learn from those people and they learn from you as well.
And I'm sure you've made countless new friends by doing that, not even just fellow musicians and fellow performers, but, like guests on the ship, people that are more on the kind of managerial side. I'm sure that you've had repeated experiences working on like with similar cruise lines or whatever. I know nothing about cruise ships, but I can imagine there's a really cool sort of family dynamic, when you're on that boat with the same amount of people for that long of a stretch of time. There has to be some level of interaction that sticks even once you get off the boat, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a camaraderie, I guess.
Okay.
That's
I would
true.
imagine it's kind of like having like a work family.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is a good way to put it because like your work family is a group of people that know everything that goes down at your job, completely understand it, and you get along with them there. Um, but some of them you don't see ever outside of that setting. So it's always a totally different dynamic. I know they're apples and oranges, but I always got that from like for years I worked in the supermarket, and you get that same kind of situation, that camaraderie of like you're all going through a similar situation in a similar setting, so you kind of all band together by situation. And I would imagine it's probably rather similar to that. Um, I guess another question I have really is, when it comes down to the differences between like just regular gigging and doing that, are there massive differences? Are there small differences? Besides the fact that obviously on a cruise ship type of situation, you're obviously going to be playing a lot of the same music over and over again. Do you find that it's more enjoyable to gig versus being on a cruise?
I mean, they're definitely apples and oranges. I musically speaking, I prefer gigging, outside of the cruise ship
Hmm.
because I have more say in what I play, um,
Okay.
what
Hmm,
I get.
that's really liberating.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't. I'm surprised we haven't crossed this point. I'm kind of ashamed I haven't even mentioned it. But typically, what kind of music are you playing? If you'd like to tell the audience what you're playing normally.
Sure, yeah. So again, there's different bands, different music jobs within the cruise ship. Usually, I am in the house, um,
Okay.
which plays in the theater every night. So what will happen usually is that we'll have a guest entertainer come on board, um, and these people will. There's a lot of like American Idol finalists or
Oh, okay. Interesting.
B or C level artists that have had um, success in the past, but might be retiring or tastes have changed and people modern day people don't like it as much as the clientele on a cruise ship. So
Okay.
a lot of that, and what will happen is these people, these headliner artists will come on and will basically be their backup band.
So you're playing a ton of different styles then.
Well,
Some different
You would
styles.
think in theory, right? But in practice, when you start getting some of that woodwork coming through, you start finding yourself doing a lot of the same stuff where you can pretty easily just jump in and pretty much sight read something you haven't seen before because you really have seen it before, right? Because it's the same chord progressions, it's the same keys, it's the same stylistic trends from artist to artist that are like, especially because it looks like they're probably targeting a particular, just by the nature of your description, right? There's a really particular demographic of what artists are being invited to perform on those cruise ships. It's not like you're getting a classical concert trained pianist, and then you're getting classical guitar, and then you're getting like a punk band, and then there's probably not as much stylistic diversity in more of like the pop vein of who they're bringing on to sell more tickets, right?
exactly, and I mean they do bring on other styles, other instrumentalists, other people. They try to have a variety of artists. However, and this is not to bash on these headlining artists because I mean, God knows we're all trying to make a living here. But at the end of the day, you want to have a show that is a crowd pleaser.
Yeah.
Gosh darn it, if you're a classical guitarist and everybody wants to hear Hey Jude, you're going to play a classical guitar version of Hey Jude just
Yep.
getting that gig. So, I
Been
mean,
there, done that.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess, I mean, that definitely makes sense given that because you have like an audience that's looking for a particular sound rather than like an audience that's going to a show because they're looking to watch a particular act. Like obviously in the gigging environment, like when you're performing and people
When
are
you're
coming
playing,
to
they're
your
coming
show,
to you. So
like
there's already an immediate interest pool there that might
right,
not necessarily be there on a cruise.
Exactly. Like when you're like out gigging, not in a crew setting, and you've got people who are coming to see you perform, what type of stuff are you typically performing?
Me personally,
You
I do
personally?
when with my own group, it's primarily jazz and that world.
Do you
Uh,
guys write your own tunes, or do you play a lot of standards, or
uh,
both?
both, both.
Okay.
I You were mentioning it earlier. I released an album 2 years ago, I guess now, and that's all original stuff, and so I'll play original stuff, but also a
Very
lot of
cool.
stuff like that. So
But no, I mean that kind of brings a good point there too, because like I would imagine it's probably more enjoyable for you personally in that sense, doing what you're doing there rather gigging. It just has that uncertainty of like, when's the next gig coming? Is that going to pay enough for? And that I understand. It's almost like, and we've talked about this before. It almost seems like in the music business itself, it's either you really get to enjoy what you're doing, but there's the uncertainty, or it's something where it's a little bit more mundane and routine, but at least there's a security with it, which is unfortunate. And that's, I know that's one of the reasons a lot of musicians usually tend to decide to at least double major sometimes in music ed to have that backup. But I think without the performance side of it, it's one of those things that furthers music and kind of pushes us, further in that direction of having more entertaining music to listen to. Like I know I started to dig into this a few years ago because for a long time I was like listening typically to prog rock and like classic rock and all, and like old like jazz fusion and whatnot. I started to stretch out into listening to artists like Lewis Cole and his group Knower. I had a few friends, people we knew from Westchester who actually are up in the New York scene as well. Started also watching like Adam Neely's channel and that kind of
Oh
stuff.
yeah, I love that guy.
And it was interesting to see because I'm like, all right, well, this kind of stuff, I wish it was much more in the forefront because the talent level is off the charts.
Hmm.
And like, it's awesome to see that it almost has like I wouldn't call it like a cult following, but it definitely has a following on
A little
YouTube
bit more of
itself.
like an underground kind of scene to it.
Yeah, it's like
Not
underground, but
mainstream at all.
mainstream among musicians who are in the know.
yeah,
And that part is amazing to me that like that's becoming as well known as it is because it's almost like this jazz renaissance that has these funk and sometimes like electronica kind of elements to it, which is awesome to see. Which I give you full marks for because I'm always happy to see more people get interested in jazz music because it is definitely more complicated than rock music or punk music, and that's always a nice thing to see. I mean, do you find that like you have a large number of people coming to see your shows who are non-musicians, or are they mostly musicians?
no, I would see it like in my the southeast Pennsylvania region where I'm based. Get a pretty big turnout now. I'm definitely grown a following, which is really nice. Now, of course, with this COVID,
The elephant in the room. Yeah. So what happened in March for you? Once COVID hit like a truck and everything shut down completely? What have you been up to in the last couple of months since? How have you handled dealing with that whole aspect of being a musician being taken away from all of us?
yeah,
What did you do to cope?
it's definitely been like a truck. I was actually in the middle of a contract on a ship. I was actually in
Oh
a
man.
Oh wow.
it. Um, Luckily, I got off the ship. Luckily, the company sent everyone home just in time, so I didn't get stuck. But yeah, I've just been doing nothing really.
No, I mean it's a feeling that we all went through. I know for like the first 2 or 3 months, like for me, primarily I'm either like teaching music in the schools for different teachers, or I'm teaching lessons, or both. And when everything stopped, it was like, okay, what do I do now? There's like there's this void essentially, and I could definitely see that being even worse when you're like used to consistently performing because it is it's something that like not only is it enjoyable to perform, but it's also kind of a symbiotic relationship with the audience as well, that like you kind of feed off of that. I know my father for years played in rock bands and always enjoyed the audience enjoying what they were doing aspect of it. And I think when you rip that away from a performer, it's kind of like you take a part of them away.
Yeah.
And I know there were a lot of there was a ton of material that came out in the ensuing months, past like the first few months of the pandemic starting, about artists who were trying to find ways to like actually be able to perform virtually by cutting down latency. I know there was a lot of work with that kind of stuff, but it never really kind of rose to the forefront like I was hoping it was going to. Did you ever get a chance to try any of that kind of stuff?
I haven't tried like virtual concerts or anything like that. The main reason being I'm an instrumentalist and I can't really do that, like play a concert without my band.
And right, you kind of need the backup. You can't really do it yourself.
Okay,
Right. At least I wouldn't be happy with the results,
I got you.
with everyone being like kind of quarantined. It's hard to put a band together, especially when you don't know if it's even gonna, pay for their gas or whatever to meet up.
True. I mean, I guess the question that begs is like, what can you do as an artist? What options? I mean, like I know a lot of people have been trying to like think outside the box, doing like getting their groups together in a room, performing, and allowing for donations for that kind of stuff. Obviously now, unfortunately, even though it was starting to wane in the past month or so, and people were doing like outdoor performances, uh, what's the goal for you? What's the path? And I mean, do you have any idea what you're going to try and do at all, or?
Honestly, no. I mean, I've definitely seen a lot of, um, Facebook Live or Zoom concert stuff. Um, that that works to an extent, I guess. But again, you have to have, your like group, your band with you, and they have to be okay with all of that.
Gotcha. Well, no, I mean, I guess I could completely understand that being tough to do because it's basically trying to make the best of a bad situation in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, for an indeterminate amount of time.
Exactly. I mean, I know for both Danton and myself, we went from teaching in person to teaching virtually, which doesn't lose quite as much of its potency, but was still rough enough to deal with, especially because like you didn't realize how important like that aspect of being able to play something on the instrument that your student is playing right next to you and being able to explain stuff. So I
Even
know
just
that was
play with
a
them,
big thing
like
for us.
in
And
wet
I know
settings.
you said you've been doing some teaching as well, um, which we'll actually get to in a little bit. But I guess the last thing I really wanted to ask you, despite what's going on right now, is what advice do you have for performers that are looking to get started, or at least those who would like to get started in the field?
And if you asked me this a year ago, I think my answer would be very different.
Absolutely.
Well, that's why I said barring what's going on,
Yeah.
because eventually it will
Yeah.
hopefully
So
go
let's
away.
pretend it's November 2019.
Yeah, let's do that.
I mean, I guess it's hard to do that, especially with what's going on and how the industry has just been decimated. So my advice to, like the idea to follow your dreams no matter what might not be as realistic right now because no one knows if being a professional musician is going to be a viable career anymore. I
Okay.
mean, at least not for the, you know, next year or two.
At
I
least.
can't,
Yeah.
I can't see live music coming back
At least not in the
anytime.
winter weather. Definitely.
Right, and
Yeah,
even barring winter weather, just the fact that we're still in the midst of this pandemic, and it's kind of frustrating for me, kind of seeing like especially now with like the back to school season, the last 2 months of schools trying to open back up, and extracurricular academic programs trying to like still do things, and football season starting up, and like I feel like we're all kind of like I get it that people are sick of being cooped up at home with nothing to do, but like just because we're sick and tired of the pandemic doesn't mean that it went away. Just because we want to have the kids back to school, just because we want to go to concerts, just because we want to watch a football game, that doesn't mean the virus went away. Like it's still out there, and there are still cases, and there are still deaths each and every day, and it's really sad. But like I said, barring of course, outdoor performance environment is a big thing in the nicer seas, especially in our neck of the woods here in Pennsylvania. But yeah, like I get the feeling that the lasting like even once we're kind of in the post-COVID world, it's still going to be a pretty significant stretch of time until the live music performance industry is anywhere close to where it was before the pandemic hit in the first place. So even so, I'm really the more we're thinking about it, the more I'm kind of, I hate to say pessimistically, but pretty much pessimistically looking at the impact over the next 5 to 10 years of what it's going to mean for all like those high school kids now that are great players and wanted to pursue a career in being a professional musician. And now it really seems like like as Adam said, an unrealistic expectation to really go and pursue something like that. And how many of those fantastic players of that next generation are going to go and become engineers and software developers and do something else because they can't do music right now? And that's really sad. And then the question then rises of, will they ever go back?
I think they will. I mean, I think
If they
one thing
love
you'll
it
see is
enough.
that, like, I think the one thing you'll see, and the part I've always enjoyed seeing, is that performers, educators, anybody involved in the music field, we're rather creative when we're forced to be so.
Hmm.
Um, and so the nice part is that, like, I know that we're going to wind up finding ways to get music out there, to at least make sure it sustains, because there's no way we can basically go like, a year or two's time without some sort of artistic output in general. I mean, it would be like, it's basically asking the culture to stop for a year and a half. And
Yeah,
I get it,
which
because
is impossible. Yeah.
a lot of things have ground to a halt. And not only that, I mean, one thing I can say is I appreciate both of you being rather candid about this, because it is a reality we're going to be facing. Um, but I think a big part of it that, is going to be important for all of us to do is to kind of keep things moving, keep that wheel greased, so that when things do start to get better, it's going to take a lot less effort to get it all started back up again,
Yeah, it will
because
be
there
a lot
will be
better.
live music again. There will be,
Yeah.
new music being put together and developed again. But I think a lot of it is going to be like us kind of getting used to the idea of, okay, I may not be able to perform with somebody in person, but we can definitely put something together. So the lucky part is I'm glad it happened in 2020 and not like 1980, when it probably would have completely ground the music industry to a halt, because you had no internet to help with any of this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Uh,
there at least are some forms of facilitation going on here. So
mhm,
like it's not like a completely like loss of hope. It's not a completely lost cause. Like, all right, there are still ways, you could launch a YouTube channel and start putting material together. I
mhm.
know a lot of artists that I follow have just said, all right, well, if we can't tour, if we can't perform, we're just going to go back to the studio and record more stuff. So we're just going to make new content. And that when, and if that doubles or triples the speed of writing stuff because we're not playing, so be it. So people are definitely finding outlets, but it's definitely going to have a massive kind of ripple effect, I think, if not already.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
guess I you asked me about advice for kids looking in to get into music, and despite being rather pessimistic, it's actually a great time if you have the drive, because we all have all this extra time, all this extra free time that we wouldn't have had at other points. So if you're able to concentrate and use it to your advantage, there's definitely a lot of practice you can get done, a lot of learning you can get done, a lot of creating you can get done without all the other distractions of the outside world that we're used to. So in that way, it can be looked at as a good thing. And as far as the industry goes and making money in the industry, I guess I would just suggest students to start diversifying your output now.
Okay. No, I think that's completely reasonable. I think you're exactly right. Having that more, again, in big air quotes there, free time. Like I said, I think it'll result in a large like burst of new stuff coming out once this really goes away, because with that much time to create, you're going to see a lot of stuff added into the field. Like, obviously you have artists who are busy gigging or touring and aren't spending that time always writing new music that they might want to write. I think you're going to see a ton of creative stuff come out. Now, some of it may be more on the darker side. My inner Star Wars nerd is coming out. I won't go get the lightsaber, I promise. So you might see something that has like a little bit of a darker tone, some that has more of a hopeful tone, but I think we're going to see a lot of stuff coming out within the next year to 2 years that I'm optimistic about. I'm trying to keep an optimistic approach too. I mean, even you said like picking up another instrument. I spent some time trying to pick up the guitar because I'm not a great guitar player by any way, shape, or form at all. I have fingers that are like dumb and don't play chords correctly. Um, but I'm hoping that it's going to be that way. I'm keeping optimistic as best I can, and I think you're right. I think it's important, but I think you're also right when you say it's important for young artists to kind of diversify your skills. I know we've all become really, really good video editors when it comes time for any kind of performance stuff. I know I have. Um, but yeah, I mean, we'll kind of get away from this topic too, because I don't want to keep things too pessimistic. But obviously, it's an important part of what's going on now and a reality you're facing.
Well, a really
But
easy segue we can kind of do to go off on a tangent. We talked so much about performing and writing and creating, but we haven't really even acknowledged the possibility of teaching,
oh yeah,
especially now. Like I would say any adequate performer can get their foot in the door with teaching. And despite the lack of in-person contact, there's a lot you can do with an online setup in your room. And think of how many teachers out of their bedrooms or out of their living rooms are, setting up a webcam over their piano and, getting their feet wet, starting to teach lessons. And that can kind of branch out to be like a nice little side hustle that any someone like Adam who primarily performs all the time, you'll always have that, those couple of private students on the side to supplement your income. And that helps you get much closer to striking that balance from the kind of gig oriented, grinding and trying to get what you're looking to do to perform. But then you also have a little bit of that consistency of like, all right, I always got like, even if it's only 2 or 3 students a week, that you teach, like you pick one night and you teach for an hour and a half, and you have that nice week to week, like I know I'm going to teach X, Y, and Z lessons. And at least for me, like private teaching is my big thing. Anyone who knows me knows that that's the kind of avenue I've pursued and have been very actively doing the past several years. But I would argue as a performer and a teacher, for me, like teaching privately has made me a much better player. Because not just because you're always put on that spot where you have to demonstrate for your students how to do things correctly, or if you're like me and you're actively trying to make the private teaching thing your full-time gig, where I was grinding for 2 years to get a full body of students. So it's always that aspect of meeting a new family and the inevitable question of a parent asking, well, can you play something for us so we know that you're worth hiring? And yeah, I've had that happen, and I'm not angry about that at all. It's completely understandable. So like it's made me a better player, like oh, I should have a couple pieces like just cooked and ready to go on the piano, so if someone asks me, I can play through a set of Scarlatti sonatas, or I can play at least the start of a Beethoven sonata, because I don't want to sit there and spend a half hour on their piano naturally. As much as I would love that, they're paying me to teach their kid, not to play. So it's for me like the lines between performing and teaching get blurred. But yeah, like I can't tell you how many times like I'm working like with an advanced level guitar player and we're focusing on some like really deep intricacy of rhythm, and then I'm kind of reflecting on that in my own practice when I'm playing, like, oh yeah, this is all the same stuff that I'm telling my students to do. Let me try to kind of do more of that myself, and it's made me a much better player on piano and on guitar, I would say. So if nothing else, if it's not, practically, it's a nice supplement to income, but musically it's another way to connect with people using your instrument. And I think now, since private teaching is still a viable option, I mean for me, like I always I feel guilty saying this. I don't know if I mentioned this on a previous episode of this, or maybe on a different podcast elsewhere, but I kind of feel guilty that once everything shut down, I was kind of able to make the shift pretty easily and like keep all the teaching stuff going. Like we just switched to doing it on Zoom, and it worked. And since then we've actually grown a bit. And for me, COVID has been awesome because now I get to do it without all the driving that I was doing before. And And there's definitely a much different teaching environment, when you're teaching from home, and you're doing it online, and you got your kids in their pajamas, and it's like, yeah, I guess I don't even really have to bother getting dressed for this. I'm guilty of it. I've done lessons in my pajamas before. You could ask some of my students, they'll see me like with a Charmander t-shirt or something on, and like, it's not the way I would present myself if I was physically going to their house. And for me, part of it, like the kind of more laid back nature of it has been really fun, and it's created a much different dynamic in my lessons, and it's actually produced some really great musical results. I've had a number of kids that are like leveling up from level 2 to level 3 on their piano books, level 1 to level 2. Kids now having that idea of like, all right, maybe I'm not going to be able to perform in a public recital for Doc Rocker Music Academy, but now we can just make a video at home, and we can get more into like the recording side of it. Like, let me get like a nice video of me playing my piece that I was working on. We did a nice little virtual recital back in the spring, and we're going to be launching another one in a couple of weeks. So yeah, so kind of piggybacking off of what Adam said of, not really giving up and continuing to pursue your craft, consider teaching as another option, another avenue through which you can still further your performing career too.
That's a really good point, especially, I mean, bringing it back to what students can do. As dark as this as dark as this is, and because all the gigs have dried up, there's actually a huge opportunity for students to learn with some really great people. Obviously, I'm teaching private lessons, and I know you guys are as well.
Mm-hmm.
I even took some private lessons earlier in the year. I mean, Ken Poplowski is offering private lessons now via Zoom. Jane Monheit is offering private lessons via Zoom. Like, just these legends
Yeah.
are trying to fill the void from losing all their gigs and trying to fill their time. So you can get lessons with people you would never have been able to even talk to before.
There's another inadvertent good thing about,
That's
COVID.
true. No, I think that's a really awesome point too, because like, look, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Even for those of us that have been teaching, we never stop learning either.
Yeah.
And it's awesome to have the ability to like take lessons with those who are like absolute legends in the field. It's amazing. And like, when else would you have an opportunity to do that? Because of course the answer is during a global pandemic. That's the last time. But no, I mean, that makes a really good point. I think more than anything else, I think it's shifted the perception in general from music lessons as a thing a student does beyond what they do with their schoolwork to like, this is actually like interaction with the outside world that they get. That's important to them. That actually gives them something to keep them like sane throughout this time. I've seen that change in perception, and that part I will say I think has been a benefit, because that change of perception across the board has really benefited people's approach to what music does for their lives. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again too. I think the absence of performance might actually make people not take music for granted, which I know a lot of people do. I know this full well saying that like 5 years down the line, when this all hopefully goes away, that it will probably go back to regress to the mean. But I hope for some people kind of gives them the idea of, yeah, this almost went away, so I should actually like make sure I do something to let those people know who are making this happen that I appreciate them, whether that's the form of, musicians getting paid more for gigs at certain
Yes.
Yeah, I know. I mean, like I've said before, and we all have seen the memes, you can't pay your rent with exposure. But at the same time, I really think that's at least one effect I've seen, is that it's become this thing people have been more grateful for than something that was like a nice thing that they did besides all the other stuff they had going on. I think that's a plus side.
And whether that means musicians getting fairer pay, or it means more active participation in lesser known artists performing, like I can speak from experience. How many times there's like a local kind of underground metal band playing at some bar in Philly, and it's like, it's, I might go, I might not. And now it's like, now it's like, oh, all of the shows that I passed up that I could have gone to, that, now like it's gonna at least affect me as a concert goer. Once those bands come back to performing in the limelight again, it's like, yeah, no, we should really get out and support those bands, and like definitely, like you said, Russ, not taking it for granted by any means.
I mean, I know, look, all of us are living in like the internet age of music where all you have to do is literally type the name into YouTube and it comes up for free. Um,
Mhm.
but I think this might be one of the final pushes that makes us realize like, hey, I can listen to this for free, but I should still support this artist if I like their material. Which like I know there's newer artists that I enjoy listening to their music and could just just listen to it on YouTube and call it a day there. But I've bought their albums,
Mm.
CDs, digital downloads, essentially as a means of like, yeah, I like this music enough that I want to buy this and support that artist. And I'm hoping that that'll make an even greater return because of this point where like people have had a chance to actually realize how much they actually are grateful for the music they have every day in their lives. Because when it goes away, it kind of makes you realize like, oh, I actually like this a lot and I'm sad that it went away, you know?
Yeah.
But actually, before we get too far into that, I did want to kind of ask you a question related to this, because this is our next topic, talking about like music education skills learned from performing versus like education training. I know for myself personally, as somebody who primarily doesn't perform all that much, that the education training that both Dan and I received was not woefully insufficient, but it it lacks the ability to cover every single topic you'll really come across.
Mm.
So I guess my main question to you, Adam, was what skills did performing bestow upon you that maybe an education training would not, that's been beneficial to you for teaching lessons or just any situation in general?
Yeah. I think if it makes you feel any better, I think my education was woefully woefully bad as well. So there's certain things that you just can't learn in a sterile classroom environment. There's certain things that you learn better on the job kind of deal. Um, and even knowing that, I don't know if I could teach it to students in a classroom environment.
Okay.
I think
No,
it's
that's completely fair. No, I mean, we even talked about this in a previous episode where we talked about teaching improvisation. Um, it's one of those things where you couldn't like crack open a book to a page and say like, okay, yeah, this is how I'm going to solo for this piece. You only get better at doing that by doing that. And I
yeah.
think you're absolutely correct. Um, I guess I should rephrase though, because I mean, I'm wondering like what skills that at least bestowed upon like you when it comes time for teaching private lessons, which is a totally different mindset than teaching a classroom. I could see teaching a classroom might not give you as much of an advantage to work there, but I would imagine it definitely does for teaching private lessons.
Yeah. Um, I guess so. I
Okay.
I just there's definitely things that you can explain and you can try and teach, but at the end of the day you have to perform to get better at them. You have to practice them in a job setting to get actually to make it sink in. At least that's how it was for me.
Yeah, where that pressure is on, and people are watching, and it's time to really perform and deliver. And it takes a couple, you know, for any aspiring performer out there, it takes any just like practicing the skill itself. There's a difference between practicing and practicing performing, right? Where like you could have all of your skills worked out, you could have all your fingerings memorized on clarinet, and you could know what changes to your embouchure you make when you're going from register to register. But until you've actually gone up on stage and done that live in front of an audience under pressure, that's a whole different skill. It's almost distant from the actual just technical prowess on the instrument. And that's something I talk to my kids about all the time, because again, pre-COVID, we were doing public recitals every season. We had a spring recital, a summer recital, a fall recital. Every couple months there was a chance to, and again, I would always target retirement communities because it was a really nice way to bring the community together and to give back to the community, create a nice low-key, low-pressure environment for my students to perform. Because a lot of my kids are beginners still. Like I said, I've just kind of started this business about 2 years ago, so it's still in its infancy, fledgling state. But that idea of like, okay, yeah, like just get up every season and go perform. And naturally, there was a big difference between some of my kids who played in March and when they did it the third or fourth time through in October. They had a lot more confidence and they had a lot more good musicianship when they were on their stage, a lot better, troubleshooting any kind of memory slip or mistake, being able to make adaptations, because it's like, all right, I just did this back in the summer in this other recital. And now I did this. And of course, following up on that and talking about it in the lessons too. And, that idea of, that Aristotelian learn by doing, right? And it comes just as true with performing as it does for teaching. I think how many times there's like a really great player. I mean, I've seen this all the time when I've like coached younger teachers in the past, of like, all right, this kid's a great player. Let's put him in the teacher's seat and let him work with a kid on learning how to, just teaching a basic lesson. And the first time there's always a little bit of that awkwardness of like first getting into it and doing it. And then by the third or fourth lesson, and everyone has their own pace of when that level of comfortability comes, heck, I even think the first 2 or 3 times I tried singing karaoke in a bar for fun. And it's like, oh yeah, I know how to sing. I'm classically trained. I have perfect pitch and I have some semblance of mic technique. I can figure it out. And like the first couple times I go up there, it's like, whoa, I did not expect it to go like that at all. And I really don't know that song as well as I thought I did. And, and fast forward a couple months of doing it like every week, like I would consistently, for me, it was like a fun way to just practice performing as a singer. And it got to the point where I was doing it every week and like really, not to boast, but doing some like real knockout performances where like, lots of applause and lots of people like, recognizing, what I did and appreciating it and respecting it. And, it's funny because like I spent years and years and years like at university, like taking lessons and learning how to develop my scales and my tone and all the different things you can do, singing in choruses and sight singing and singing for churches and singing for this and singing for that. But actually getting up and singing in front of people by yourself is grossly different. So there's that level of factor of, just doing it a lot. And as Adam said, you don't really get that in that sterile environment in a classroom, which is a shame, because I know, at least from my own and Russ's experiences at Westchester, I feel like the program was designed with that intent. It was very performance heavy. There was a lot of getting up in your voice class and singing in front of your colleagues and picking it apart. And, we all had weekly studio sessions with our private teachers. And there was a lot of like that constant being put on the spot kind of thing. And I think naturally it's kind of a way to kind of weed out a lot of the students that would not quite be able to handle the full breadth of the program. But it's funny, despite all of that training, it's totally different when you show up to your student's house and you knock on their door and you sit down with them at their piano. And sometimes, like even now, I've been doing piano my whole life, and every once in a while I get that feeling. It's like I don't even know what a piano is. Like I don't even know how it works. I don't know where the notes are. Like you get those little those kind of rough moments of like just when you're on the spot in the thick of it. And, when someone's watching and critiquing you and evaluating you, and especially when you're charging physical money for delivering a service, there's just a lot of pressure on delivering something consistent. And I think that learning to be comfortable in that mindset takes a lot of exposure and practice to doing that.
No, you're right. I mean, not only for actually, for teaching that part of it, that nervousness, but I mean, even the performance side of it as well. I know after, years of performing in concert bands, jazz bands, some solo stuff as well for my, when I was at college, I still to this day deal with the nerves a lot, regardless, like getting up to play. I mean, I think the one thing that I could say, or at least that I would assume, consistently performing helps with, is finding techniques for kind of calming your nerves down before you get up and, before you get up and play. Instead of having that, like, nerves going crazy, it's more like turning it into like nervous, anxious energy about being excited to play. I mean, I would think that definitely is one total benefit performing on a consistent basis would give you, when it comes time for, being able to teach that to a student. But I guess my question is, what techniques do you use personally, or what techniques would you teach a student for dealing with performance anxiety?
And that's a great question, because like even I've been doing this, gosh, so long now, and I still get nervous sometimes, you know.
Hmm. It happens to all of us. It's a very human thing.
That it's crazy, you know. So, Dan, what you were saying about making students teach, making students have like a recital, that's huge. No matter how much they hate it, it really helps a lot. And the more you can practice being okay in front of people, because teaching is performing too, really.
Yeah.
So the more you can be okay being in front of people, and the more you can practice that, the better, I think. As far as specific techniques, other than just, you know, forcing them to do recitals or forcing them to teach in front of the class, uh, honestly, I don't know, because if I did, I would use it on myself.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that golden nectar of like the secret of life.
Yeah.
I know,
But
like, I
I
would
mean,
go through like the 5 stages of grief, like about every 10 minutes, several times before juries would come up. Um,
oh God.
but no, I mean, you bring up a good point, and I think this is one of those sides of like just teaching music in general, especially when you're teaching privately, that is very much, it's kind of a conflict about like how do you handle it, because most of us, pretty much all of us as music teachers would say, yeah, it's good for my student to perform. They may not be crazy about it, but the more you do it, the better you'll get at it.
Mhm.
But you will have those students who are like, absolutely not. I want nothing to do with being up in front of people. I don't want anybody to see me perform because in case I mess up a note. Um, I know one of the things I tend to tell them that I know is one of those really irrational things we all have in our heads is like, how many times have you gone to perform something solo or with a group and thought the audience will know every single note that I've messed up, as if they're sitting there with the score in their hands and having the exact knowledge of the music you do? And just a slight show of hands, I know I'm guilty of it. I definitely was, and it took a lot of mental kind of rearrangement of how I approached it to realize like, okay, unless like my instrument implodes while I'm up on the stage, chances are they're not going to know if I mess up a note unless like my voice like just completely goes out in the middle of something, or like, you know, puberty makes a return, my voice cracks, or, you know, something to that extent. I think that's one thing I found telling students that like, hey, if you're getting up to perform, and I get that you're nervous about it, but there are only a few people in that room who are going to know like the absolute ins and outs of what you're playing, and that is you, your teacher if they're in the room, and anybody else who might actually know the tune who's a performer. But the vast majority of people you perform for are typically not musicians, or at least not in the sense of what somebody who's teaching would be, or even a student. I think that helps with getting over that, but it's still tough to get over it completely.
Yeah, for sure. I know I don't think I have had a single performance in my entire life that I was happy with.
Oh, I feel that. I
Spoken
understand.
like a true musician. I
Oh,
love that.
the
That is
dress rehearsal is
a
always
very
the best
admirable
one.
trait.
But the more, like, you know, you go and play and you kick yourself and sound, oh, that sounded terrible. And then you have someone come up to you and say, oh my gosh, that was the best thing I've ever heard. Or, oh, I love your playing, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And obviously it doesn't make sense in your head,
Yeah, we
but
think we're lying. We're like, no, you can't be right. What are you talking about? I messed this and this and this up.
right. The more that happens, the more you realize what you were saying, Russ, that people don't know what you're trying to do. They're not mind readers. They're not hearing what notes are in your head. They're not hearing the notes that you didn't think you played perfectly. So the more experience you have of that, people just not knowing, the more you'll realize you're not as bad as you think you are.
Yeah,
I,
and I feel like both of those factors kind of funnel into a positive reinforcement of your musical abilities. Not only your own self critiques of like, all right, now I got up on stage and I played this thing, so I know I can do it, but I also know what I can do better, and that's good. For me, that put me right back on the practice bench. Like sometimes like after playing like in some like weeknight like little honors recitals and things at university level, like as soon as I was done, it's like, all right, back upstairs to the practice room. Let me like now while it's fresh in my head, let me go through and kind of work it into my playing, and getting that positive reinforcement from an audience member, you know, whether that was a colleague, a fellow student, or in my more professional environments, like having, you know, like a sweet little old lady hobble up to me after I play at an old folks home and tell me just how much she absolutely loved every aspect about it. Even times when I've gone and played recitals where I like butchered pieces and, you know, memory slips and like missing sections, and like they just absolutely love it. And it's like, all right, well, I'm doing something right. But now it's, so let me take that positive reinforcement of, oh, I am making an impact on somebody. I'm making somebody happy. You know, I'm a successful entertainer. But all the things I just said, and then you put both of those into the forefront of your consciousness, and you have that in your mind as you're practicing that day, the next day, the rest of that week, you know. And as Adam said, the more you do it, it just starts to kind of compound on itself, and it snowballs into this really nice, I'm constantly getting better, and I'm always working towards doing something that I really love to do.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember or remind ourselves that as artists, our true job, our calling, it's not to be perfect, it's to touch people's lives.
Mhm.
Remember that, it will take some of the pressure off.
Yeah. Even if that audience is your family in your living room, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, we're talking so much about like, oh, perform, just perform over and over again. And everyone's probably thinking to themselves, well, dude, how? It's COVID. I can't just go to a retirement home and play.
If you're
I can't
happy.
just go to the church and play. I can't, if I'm a 20 somethings guitar player, I can't just go to a bar and play like an open mic. I can't do that now. What do I do? Play for whoever is in your house with you. You know, I tell that to my students all the time. Get your brother to sit down and listen to you play. Get your mom and dad to watch. Even, you know, get your stuffed animal collection and put them all behind the piano. And literally, like, it was something that my parents had me do when I was a kid growing up, like, because I would get like anxious about performing things. It's like, dude, just get all like the stuffed animals in the house and like get up and like do your performance and like play. Because even though they're not real people, the sensation, the feelings that you get from when you are being watched by real people applies. It actually worked. It was kind of funny how it worked. I'm sitting there like, you know, practicing like a karate demonstration or practicing a piano recital piece for like whatever, you know, like just, you know, if you don't have an audience, if you live alone, make one up in your head. But like put yourself in that different mindset of like, you know, you're being watched and you're performing for somebody. And it really makes a profound impact on your playing when you are practicing. That's why I always say there's a difference between practice and performance practice. And the more you do both, especially with an upcoming performance, I have my students like, all right, so I'll even like sit further back in the room and like, let's have you walk onto the stage and take your bow and
Yeah.
sit, perform your piece start to finish, no stops. You don't go back to fix mistakes. Whatever happens, let it happen. And then the most important part, at least for piano, you know, this applies to any instrument, I would say though, but like for a pianist, then physically get up and walk away from the piano. Because the first thing you want to do is like, let me go back to that third page because I missed this one thing. But like, get up and leave that performance you did behind you, and then we come back, and then I pull this chair up, and then we talk about it, and we practice, and we rehearse, and whatever. But like that process of doing that over and over, and I do it a lot during recital seasons. You know, like usually every October we usually do a recital, so it's like, all right, perform every week of the October lessons until the end of the month recital. And I found that to be a really effective teaching strategy for teaching performing, you know, and especially for helping a lot of my younger kids overcome that performance anxiety, like create that feeling. So basically it's just desensitization, if that's the right way to say that word.
No, that's exactly, yeah.
Oh, okay.
You got it. It's all good.
Stuck my foot in my mouth as I usually do.
Oh, don't worry, I'll let you know.
But yeah, but by the time they do the real performance, it's like, oh, I've already done this 5 or 6 times. I'm used to it. It's like standing in a cold swimming pool. Eventually, your body temperature adjusts to the temperature of the water, and you just get used to it. Not to say that that's the end all be all, but I found that, especially that desensitization approach, to be really, really effective, especially with my more anxious performers. Now, that being said, I have some, like Russ was mentioned before, like some kids that like absolutely not, don't want to play, never want to play. Some of my best players, some of my strongest students hate the idea of performing, and I don't force them to. I always strongly encourage. I push for every student I teach to perform as many times as they can, but some of my students don't, and that's totally okay too. But if you're looking to get into performing, don't let COVID stop you from playing for your cat, playing for your puppy, play for if you're living with your parents, play for them. If you're living with your kids, play for them. If you're an adult, picking up the piano because, you have cut work hours and you started taking lessons, or even if you're self-teaching with a bunch of YouTube tutorial videos, which I don't recommend, but if you're doing it, play for your kids, play for your significant other, just get yourself, even if it's one person is all you need to just sit in that room and watch you play. And it makes a world of difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, actually kind of along that line, at least just talking about like the kind of things, the kind of skills you learn from being a performer and from performing itself. Adam, obviously, like you said before, and Danton mentioned, you had taught at Fairwood, obviously with a bunch of other music teachers as well. But my question to you really came down to like, have you observed in the past any major differences between those who teach music, who take the performer's path primarily, versus those who take the music ed path primarily? Are there any discernible differences? Do you notice a difference in approach?
Approach in teaching?
Yeah, approach in teaching, like how they would like approach teaching a particular piece of music, or approach teaching a group of students, or those kind of things. Are there any discernible differences?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the big one I think is that we, as like performance majors, wouldn't have had the like education theory classes as much. So whether it's good or bad, you don't have those things in the back of your head, so you kind of just have to figure it out yourself and see what works.
Okay.
So I don't, that might be a bad thing, but that's one big difference. The other one is just life experiences. A lot of teachers go in and they go straight to teaching in a public school or a private school, as opposed to taking time out and learning about the music business as a business instead of just like education. So in that aspect, performers would have different life experiences to share with their students and say, okay, well, when you go play a bar, I don't know, do X, Y, or Z, make sure they tell you what you're getting paid up front or whatever it is.
Oh yeah, that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing big. I know a lot of people who went the music education route in college and went on to be great performers, and vice versa. People who went and tried to do performing and said, you know what, it's not for me, it's too much stress, I'm going to go back and get my teaching cert and go to teach. So I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way to do it.
Okay. No, I think you're absolutely right there. I think, you even mentioned the difference in like not always having like the education theory stuff behind it, but I think the longer I go in actually like teaching and get involved in performing as well, the more I'm starting to realize that like, yeah, that stuff is an important thing that you could fall back on, but you really, it's not like you cannot do that without that stuff present. It just happens to be another thing you learned. And there again, like I've said before, I guess I refer to it, basically the education training itself as not woefully insufficient in the sense that it is very much here's a one size fits all approach, because we don't have time to teach all these different approaches. And I think I would definitely think that having those different experiences as a performer allows you to have to work out those different approaches in real time, which
Mm.
you can definitely offer that to a student as they're learning, as in like, all right, like, hey, like as you're working through this particular part, all right, let's go for this alternate fingering to make this easier to play. Let's, here's a way and a trick that you can run this particular part for something. If you're looking to try and do this, this particular scale or mode works better than this one. Whereas a lot of times I know a lot of teachers are very much teach to the page, so
Mhm.
to speak, as like written instructions versus rote instructions. And both have their merits. I know Dan and I, and I'm sure you have as well, Adam, have both encountered, teachers who never left that education environment, stepped straight out of college and straight into teaching in the classroom. And in which case it does, look, you sometimes have that academia reputation that always usually tends to influence more on the collegiate level, of course. But I tend to see that happening sometimes in classrooms too. Is that like you could tell somebody stepped straight out of like using Orff xylophones and metallophones in their classroom, and like you walk in and it looks like a percussionist playground for kids who are like 7 years old. And I'm like, I get it. I have my own personal vendetta against the recorder, so I won't talk about that. Um, that's a whole series of at least 3 or 4 episodes that I could
Stay
talk
tuned
about.
for the episode on recorders, most efficient burning methods.
Yes, I cannot wait. Except for the wooden ones; those ones actually sound good. But at the same time, like I've seen both sides to it, and you could tell the difference between those who were like performers beforehand and those who were not. And I know it offers something more than just the education route as well. And that part, I'm glad to hear that you've seen both, because I've seen some examples of both on either sides. Something that I probably didn't pay as much active attention to as I should have, given that it was several years ago at this point. But it's definitely a very helpful thing. I mean, as I'm sure you would say, and I'm sure Danton, as you would say as well, it's imperative that you get out there and play. You can't just go straight from the classroom straight to the classroom. I mean, you can technically, but still,
Yeah.
you know,
And like Adam said before, teaching in its own right is a sense of performing. So to say that you jump right from the college student teaching setting to then getting a teaching job and jumping in, that's not a bad thing, because then you're getting that firsthand experience right away, and you get that nice chance to apply all the things that are freshly learned for you. And I can imagine many teachers have gone that route and been very successful.
oh,
So
absolutely.
for me, not to like rein it back to private teaching again, just because that's like my thing, but as far as like the whole like approaching the lesson as a performer versus approaching the lesson as a teacher, going more on like the education side of it, it's a very meta kind of thing. Like Russ, you mentioned, like we have like all these different theorems and strategies that we're taught to apply in our teaching, but it's not like so much that that's like the forefront. Like, I'm looking at this kid struggling with this lesson assignment piece, and I'm gonna scaffold it in these ways. Like the scaffolding process, just for example, it unfolds very organically in the course of the lesson. Like, okay, so yeah, okay, so we're struggling, so rhythm's like a big thing, so let's just throw rhythm out completely and we'll focus. Let's make sure the hand positions are correct. Let's make sure all the notes are accurate. Let's make sure maybe parts of the music are memorized. Let's do a couple different ways to kind of digest that, and then we'll gradually work in like distinguishing quarters and halves, then distinguishing eighths to quarters, then doing it all with the proper rhythm. So like right there, and by the end of the lesson, boom, you have a scaffolded lesson. But it wasn't like I necessarily went into the lesson like, I am gonna scaffold this. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those, you're aware of the strategies, and you're thinking about your thinking as you teach. You're thinking about the different ways you could break it down for a student, and you're thinking back to which of those strategies work and which ones you've maybe tried that didn't work in the past. Maybe there are other strategies you tried that didn't work. So yeah, for me, it's always been a very meta thing. And of course, in a private setting, it depends on the student as well. It depends on, how, your own individual personal relationship with them. It depends on their learning style. It depends on the kind of what works for them and what doesn't. For me, like I could teach the same lesson to 3 different kids, and each of those lessons would go very, very differently. The way I would teach it would be completely different in some cases, depending on the kid I'm working with. So there's always that element to it as well. And I feel like there's a little bit of that kind of tying into when you're like performing live as well. There's like, of course, there's that conceptual theoretical knowledge of all of your scales and chords and keys. But, like Adam, when you're soloing, how much are you thinking, I'm using a Dorian scale here? And how much of it is, I'm just going to play through this minor scale and raise the 6 because it fits this other chord. And then after the fact, you realize, oh yeah, that was just a nice little Dorian run and I did it and it was great. it's very meta.
Yeah.
And I've always liked that part of it, and then especially the post lesson, post performance reflection that happens after. Like, all right, that part of the lesson went really, really well, and so I'm going to try and kind of get that into long term memory and be able to apply that strategy in the future. So anyway,
Yeah, there's a lot of improvisation with teaching.
yeah. And I'm surprised our improv talk didn't really go much in that direction. We didn't really even tie that back into teaching, really.
I kind of am too. Although I think we were definitely a little focused on like the actual technical aspect of soloing itself. But
Yeah, more like trying to give some improv advice rather than comparing the two. But that's
I
really
think sometimes you're right though. I think a big part of it is like, especially for private lesson teaching, but even in the classroom too. I find that getting really caught up in the whole like metaphysical aspect of like, how am I thinking about how they're going to be thinking? I'm like, just teach it. Just teach it. At the end of the day, it's like you just have to teach them what you're doing, what they're going to be doing. That's it. And I feel like as a performer, because the end goal is not like, let's talk about the process. It's no, I'm performing and I have to entertain people. I think you get a much more practical or pragmatic approach to how you handle it. And that is definitely a very good thing, I think.
Yeah, I would agree.
But that's one thing I think is a really great benefit to performing itself that can add to that, which kind of highlights the benefit of even, making sure you consistently perform, or at least are not avoiding performing. That adds to that. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's, we pretty much, dug down to the deep of the well on that one. And,
Yeah.
somebody wants to say the same thing multiple times. So I guess what I'm saying is, let's get some good gripes in here.
I was just gonna say, we're talking about so much of like what's working and what's not. Let's double down on things that don't work and get into our good gripes segment to close this episode.
The way we do this, like I've said before, and it's for everybody at home who doesn't know, like, the rules, they're not rules. The basic idea is that like we try and do a good gripe based off of the topic, but if you got something you really want to talk about, I'm not going to stop you. So our idea kind of here for this one is like the worst parts of being a performer or performing, because I mean, even as you've said, earlier on in the podcast, Adam, it's not all sunshine and rainbows in certain, circumstances. So that's up to you what you'd like to talk about. But do you have any gripes you'd like to air?
Man, I don't know.
Remember, no names.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to point fingers and name names, but
I will say, if I never have to play another ABBA song again in the rest of my life, I'll be a happy man.
Right. All the ABBA fans are going to just be smashing that dislike button right now.
Mm-hmm.
But that's okay, because we can agree to disagree on things like ABBA.
No, I think you make a great point, though, is that like, we as musicians would be like, yeah, I can't wait to play this song because it's got all these awesome parts to it, and I enjoy listening to it, and it's fun to play. And it was like, can you play Don't Stop Believing? We'd like to request that. And like the musician in me just dies a tiny bit every time that happens. But you bring up a good point. I was actually going to say something about this. There's a weird disconnect between like what you'd like to do as a musician and a performer and what people actually want to hear.
Yeah.
When you realize a large number of people just want to hear the top 40 hits.
Yeah. Actually, I have a funny story about that. Years ago, I was playing at like in the area, just dive bars in local rural Pennsylvania, and every other time someone would shout out Freebird and His Finest, whatever, it's a great song, and then it would always kind of piss me off. And then one day I'm like, you know what, screw it. And so I spent like a couple days just reharmonizing Freebird into like this out jazz piece. And of course,
I need that arrangement.
I want to hear
that on paper. Please send me that. I will kill for that.
What are their faces like when you actually play Freebird?
No one recognized it. It was just background.
Of course. I can't say I'm surprised. All that work.
Yeah, it's okay.
Like the moon over the day. Genius and brawn wasted on fools.
Oh, man. I'm like, I always wonder what it would be like when somebody actually like yells Freebird, if you actually started playing Freebird, what the reaction would be, because it's such a cliche thing at this point.
It would
but
probably
like,
be unanimous praise.
They would
I
love.
guess I don't know. I mean, I think when it comes time for that, like, and even like I was saying before, I was kind of going to mention something about this as the gripe that like, uh, it's really kind of weird realizing that like, that's probably the time you have that realization that like, oh, I'm an entertainer instead of I'm playing this thing that's meant to entertain people, but the entertainment is the byproduct of me playing rather than what I do is the byproduct of the entertaining. And yeah, I think that's one thing I do have about that is that like, um, you wind up kind of being slightly disappointed in the fact that like you played this crazy thing that's awesome to listen to, and the only people who enjoyed it
Something
in
you
the room
spent
were those people.
weeks practicing and trying
Exactly,
to perfect,
and
and you
like
finally get to that point where you can play it, and you love that about your playing, and you can't wait to share it with people. And the response is, "Yeah, that was okay, but can you play this?"
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely those of you audience members out there that are tuning into this podcast. That's the big thing that musicians will not tell you to your face to not tell them. But it's like waving at the bartender. It's just, you just don't do it. It's a slap in our face, and I would imagine there's not a musician alive out there who has ever performed that does not hate that. If you love getting requests and having people tell you to play stuff that you didn't really work on or care about working on, let us know in the comments, because I'd love to meet you, and we could have you on and talk about that, because that would be a really interesting conversation. But I think it's safe to say that like anyone who's performed and has had that reaction to their playing, it's like, what, like this thing that I was doing wasn't good enough? Like that really that kind of,
it's
it's more of an
disheartening a
insult than
little bit.
anything else. It's kind of a indirect insult to what the musician just did.
Well, I think a large part of that is I think as musicians we all kind of have this this slight belief that we're like we have not a lofty goal, but we have kind of a mission to like bring music that's interesting to listen to
Well,
a
sure.
large number of people.
Big part
And
of what
that like, all right, this song is awesome and I love listening to it, and I had a blast working on it. I spent all this time on it, and I can't wait for other people to hear this. And they're like, okay, that was nice. Can you play Dancing Queen for us? And no, I get it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you are an entertainer, and you would hope that like everybody's coming there to listen to what you've chosen to play rather than going there to hear music they've heard 1,000 times. But I think it's just something that always kind of irked me a little bit. And Adam, I imagine it irks you quite a lot as well.
Yeah, I mean it's, and I this is just full circle to the the headline artists on the cruise ships. They're, most of them are really good artists, and most of them would probably prefer not to sing Dancing Queen,
Yeah.
but they also want to get hired back. And there's like this, you have to be marketable. You have to, sing things that people want to hear, even if they've heard it a million times. And it's tough. I mean,
It's a very hard balance.
yeah.
Absolutely. No, I mean, we could talk about that all day, but I think
Oh yeah.
we've beaten that dead horse enough.
I think so.
Danton, you have a great.
Again, maybe it's not dead
I
enough.
mean, I could easily just piggyback right on that. That experience is just as true in the classical world as well. I got this really nice little freelance performing gig as a classical concert pianist. Again, playing for retirement homes in the Philly area, and it's been a blast. And it's actually spawned some regular gigging, which was a really nice lucky break. But before COVID, there was one particular community where I was getting hired to play every month. And it's like I could bank on that happening. The second Tuesday every month, I'm going to this place and playing a program, and I have kind of full reign over what I'm playing, and I can kind of shuffle in a few different programs from things I learned as a student. Like bringing back some old recital rep, and even like my audition rep. There was some really cool pieces that I've only done like once or twice at university, and it's like let me bring those back and kind of mix and match and do all this fun stuff. And some of them are harder than others. And for how many Beethoven sonatas I learned that I love to showcase and play, and then it's like, oh well, that was Beethoven. Do you know For Elise by Beethoven? I'm like, oh, for the love of God, of course I know it, but I don't want to play it. Come on, he wrote so much other stuff that's way more interesting. But so naturally, and eventually, getting feedback from my hiring agent, like, you know, they want, you know, what you're playing is great, you know, it's awesome, it's fantastic, you're whatever, but they want stuff they know. And it's like, all right, so what you're telling me is don't play the Tempest Sonata, but play for Elise instead. Okay, got it. Whatever, I'll phone it in. But like, yeah, the same thing happens to classical musicians too. There are those like few rare cases of like those pieces by famous classical composers that have kind of made it into the mainstream, mostly through Hollywood, I think. You know, and like, and those pieces just get so oft requested, and you know, again, going back to Bart Simpson writing out the bass line to Pachelbel's Canon. You know,
Wait, you're telling me the cello players don't love playing like all the Bach cello suites every time they perform, every time, ever, all the time?
yeah, exactly. So yeah, so my gripe is the same as Adam's this week, but it's just in a much different musical
Context, yeah.
context.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, we definitely, like I said, we could sit here and expound on this for time after time. But like I said, I think we beat that dead horse enough. Um, so I guess we're pretty much getting close to the end, and we're going to wrap up soon. But Adam, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about, you know, anything in terms of like websites, channels, material to check out, places to find it, anything you'd like to talk about. So I figured I'd open up the floor to you in that sense.
Yeah, sure. Adam Price Music is my handle on all the places. Got a bunch of stuff on YouTube and Spotify and all that stuff. So yeah, just search my name or the Adam Price Group, and you should be able to find me pretty easy.
Cool.
Awesome. But no, like I said, I just wanted to give you that chance too, because, you know, just in the small snippet of time I had to work with you and watch you perform as well, it was awesome. So if that's any indication, which I'm sure it is, people are going to be in for a treat with some really awesome music.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, we're pretty much about ready to wrap it up. Danton, did you have anything to kind of say in closing here for today?
No, not really. I think we pretty much hit all the nails on the head with what we wanted to talk about. So, Adam, thank you. Thank you so much for jumping on and
Thank you
being
very
part of
much.
our show. It's really humbling that you reached out so quickly and so early along this whole thing being developed, and you know, being super enthusiastic and checking out our content and now participating in our content. So we hope we could have you back.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you.
Very cool.
Awesome.
All right, guys. So those of you that are tuning in, as always, you know, feel free to share your thoughts. You know, we have a Teacher Talk Facebook group that everyone who's been part of this so far has been invited to that. And you know, if you feel you're missing your invite, just let me know. I'll send it your way, or even you can request to join the group, and we can continue the conversations further through posting on that. As always, you know, this will once this is up on YouTube, feel free to like and share and comment and subscribe, all that whole stuff that we say every time. And go check out Adam's stuff. You know, we'll link all his pages in the description below, so you can kind of check it out and see for yourself what this guy can do. So until then, you know, thank you all for watching or for listening, and stay tuned for more Teacher Talk in the next couple of weeks. Enjoy the rest of your fall.